You know what would be cool? What if a bunch of people didn't starve?
Now to the Middle East, and Palestinians have begun marking Ramadan, the Islamic month of fasting, while fierce battles continue between Israeli forces and Hamas fighters in Gaza. Let's cross live to Jerusalem and join my colleague Anna Foster. Anna.
Samantha, thank you. Good morning. Welcome to Damascus Gate in the city walls here in East Jerusalem, where people have begun marking the first day of Ramadan. You can see people moving around. This is one of the places in East Jerusalem that Palestinians often come at this time of year. But of course, many of them, because
I know this is difficult to believe,
humanitarian ceasefire,
but this is actually a part of the video and not YouTube up.
Because
really good job, BBC, you know?
Humanitarian ceasefire
in crimson
could be reached by the beginning of Ramadan, but that hasn't happened, even though channels of communication still remain open. And this is, of course, the holiest month in the Islamic calendar. It's where Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset, normally, of course, breaking that fast with an iftar meal at the end of the day. But in Gaza, it's going to be a very different Ramadan this time round. The United Nations have warned of potential mass starvation there. They say that 25% of the population are at risk of mass starvation at the moment, and they say the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says that 23 people have died so far of malnutrition, and they say that the majority of those are children. Now, I just want to show you these pictures from Al-Mawasi in eastern Gaza, and this was people last night marking, or trying to mark at least as best they could, the beginning of Ramadan. You can see the little traditional lanterns there, singing their songs and really doing what they could to mark this holy time during a time of war.
We fast every Ramadan and we put up decorations 5 or 6 days before it starts. We used to be able to get cheese and dairy and filled our fridges with food for the sunset iftar and the sunrise suhoor meals with meat. But now we can't even break our fast with a can of peas or beans, since we can't find any in the first place. With thanks to God, even with our empty bellies, we will fast to satisfy our Lord.
Oh, good luck. Do you think Netanyahu wants the West Bank to revolt? I'm sure he does, but I don't know if they will. The West Bank Palestinians aren't really in a position to do much with a revolt, except get guns pointed at them. Well, more guns pointed at them. This man is historically accurate Jesus. He does. This guy, it literally just looks like what Jesus must look like, yeah. We are there, after all.
We talked about the fighting still continuing and the fact that that humanitarian ceasefire has not been achieved by now. And in fact, even just in the last day or two, we've seen the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responding to comments.
Remarkable. Like, seriously, this is the finished
invasion of
video
Rafah right at the southern end of the Strip, where more than 1 million Palestinians are now sheltering. And Mr. Netanyahu said that invasion would still happen. He didn't give a time. Achieve Israel's stated aim, his stated aim of trying to remove Hamas fully from Gaza. There's also an aid ship that's on the way. Now, again, we've talked in the last few days about attempts to try and get aid into Gaza by sea. There's a ship in Cyprus which is due to inaugurate this new maritime aid corridor between Cyprus and Gaza, which has been established by the EU, the UK, US and others. That ship's still in port in Larnaca in Cyprus at the moment. It's been loaded over the last few days. We were told it was due to set off over the weekend, but seems to have met delays and is still in port at the moment. But let's talk a little more about those attempts to get that badly needed aid to civilians in Gaza who need it. I'm
going great.
Joined by Dr. Sarah.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us here on BBC News. What's your assessment of the way that aid is getting into Gaza at the moment? Clearly not enough.
It's very scary.
How could and should it be more efficient?
Absolutely. We are far from enough aid. So aid agencies estimate that we would need about 600 trucks a day to cross into Gaza for sufficient supplies. In February, it was about 100 trucks a day, so very, very far from what is needed for food, medical items, but also shelter items, tents, tarps, and so on. So there is very, very high need. And we've seen different attempts now to meet this need. We've seen some airdrops, first from the Jordanian Air Force, but now also the American Air Force. Those look good, yes, absolutely, and they are obviously helping, but they are very, very small volume if you're comparing it to what is actually needed. So bringing in aid by sea sounds great because that vessel that's currently in Cyprus is carrying about 200 tons of materials. So that would be very much needed. But it is also then plagued with the same issues of onward transportation. Okay, you're docking that ship somewhere, but how is the aid actually going to reach people? And that is a much larger issue.
I don't think they're going to be able to do anything with that dock in time to make any meaningful difference before the invasion of Rafah. It looks like it's going to happen pretty soon. I mean, Netanyahu's goal here is suffering, right? So attacking during Ramadan seems pretty obvious. Also, it's going to last a while. Netanyahu defended his plan to expand Israel's military offensive into the southern city of Rafah. Always with the neutralizing language. In every article, it happens so often in so many places that you forget, you know? Netanyahu defended his plan to invade the refugee city of Rafah, expand Israel's military offensive. It's subtle in a lot of cases, but it's constant. It's deliberate too, saying he doesn't want to leave a quarter of the Hamas terror army in place. Look, it's either Israel or Hamas. There is no middle way, Netanyahu said. We can't leave a quarter of the Hamas terror army in place. They're there in Rafah. This would be equivalent to saying, you know, after the Allies fought back, gone through Normandy, went through Germany, you'd say, well, let's leave a quarter of the Nazi army in place and we won't go into Berlin, the last stronghold. Remarkable. What makes me so sad about this is I don't think this genocide will get the same level of condemnation as other genocides because it's getting the endorsement of liberals. Well, maybe not now, but I think in retrospect it probably will, right? Leaving aside the fact that young people are far more likely to think that this is a genocide than older people. Like, there's a very big age gap on this issue. This is one of those, like, you know, love me, I'm a liberal moments, right? Where every civil rights struggle except for the one that you're currently engaged in right now is justified. We saw a lot of that back during the Black Lives Matter protests, too, where there were a bunch of so-called liberals who, you know, oh, they were there for the, you know, the civil rights movement. They would have been marching alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Were they able to, had they been around back then. But this modern bit, you know, this is too far. It's always like that. So, you know, in retrospect, I think. Yeah, and eventually people will come to pretend that they were always against it. Yeah, you're going to get a bunch of, like, tell-all books from members of the Biden administration where they're like, you know, I spoke out against it internally, but blah, 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 blah. It's the same thing that happened with the Iraq War. The exact same thing, you know? Could you please not talk like the grifter second thought by saying that liberals are often hypocritical and fail to apply their progressive standards equally across time and space? I think that's a pretty standard criticism leftists offer. You saw the exact same thing with the Iraq War, where back when the Iraq War happened, it seemed like everyone in the world was in favor of it. Sure, there were massive protests against it, but they didn't do shit. Every politician, everyone in media, every musician, everyone, all the celebrities. And now, in retrospect, it's like this embarrassing, you know, people are way more ready to talk about how much they didn't like it, or they just don't want to talk about it at all. At least some people at the Oscars wore red ceasefire pins. Thank you, Billie Eilish. Thank you, Mark Ruffalo. I hate this music. Thank you, person walking down the street. But is City Sweeney end woke? I think so, right? We're living in a post-woke world. Biden saying that while the Rafah attack is a red line, he will still support Israel. Man, that's crazy.
With Prime Minister Netanyahu, do you have a red line? For instance, would invasion of Rafah, which you have urged him not to do, would that be a red line?
It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical. So there's no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them. They don't have. But there's red lines that if he crosses, and he cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead as a consequence of going after. There's other ways to deal with the trauma caused by Hamas.
That's awesome. We love that, don't we, folks? Yeah, the cuck chair. Just absolutely remarkable. He literally described the invasion of Rafah as a red line. So, you know, it's a red line, but only in a completely meaningless and like it's not even a line. It's just, you know, man, most powerful person on earth, most powerful nation on earth. Hey, red line, Netanyahu, you've killed 30,000 Palestinians at least, okay? But don't slaughter this entire refugee city packed into the southernmost tip of the Gaza Strip. Oh, you're going to do it anyway? Well, I mean, what am I supposed to do? You know, spineless. You know, this would be okay. You know what? I'll say it. I agree with Republicans on this. This is an example of Democrat spinelessness. Trump would just agree with everything Netanyahu does. A common criticism, often incorrect, of Democrats when it comes to foreign policy is that they let our enemies walk all over us. He is doing that here. The GOP wouldn't agree with this example because the GOP is in favor of Israel's, genocide in Gaza. But the fundamental logic is, even if they don't apply it here, this would be the time it would be correct to apply it. Imagine using the term red line and then walking it back like this.
It's like
what are we, Russia? Jesus.
The first time I went over, I sat with them and I sat with the war cabinet. I said, look, don't make the mistake America made. America made a mistake. We went after bin Laden until we got him, but we shouldn't have gone into Ukraine. I mean, we shouldn't have gone in.
God damn it. God damn it, dude. 4 more years. 4 more years. 4 more years. Oh my God.
Into the whole thing in Iraq and Afghanistan. Wasn't necessary. Wasn't necessary.
Hey, Joe, who supported that at the time? Just curious.
It's caused more problems than it raised, than it's clearly cured.
Who actually wants a deal? Do you think Hamas actually wants a ceasefire?
Well, I think Hamas would like a total ceasefire across the board because they would see they have a better chance to survive and maybe rebuild. But that's not what.
Thank you, Biden. Mm-hmm. Oh, a ceasefire. You mean that nefarious Islamist terrorist trap to rebuild their forces, If we stop killing civilians, then we might give Hamas the room necessary for them to destroy Israel, for all we know,
What I think the vast majority of people think, you have to look. After what happened in World War II and the carpet bombing,
which he was alive for, by the way,
that took place. What happened was we ended up in a situation where we changed the rules of the game, our constitutional legitimate rules of war, and they should be abided by.
Some have suggested you should go back to Israel and address the Knesset.
Okay. I don't know if the comparison that I would reach for is the Allied strategic bombing. I don't know.
The Israeli parliament. Is that something you would do?
Yes.
Would that have to be at the end? Suggested you should go back to Israel and address the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Is that something you would do?
Yes.
Would that have to be at the invitation of the prime minister, or could that be at the invitation of the president?
I'd rather not discuss it more.
Okay.
Does that mean that has been discussed, the possibility of going back to Israel and addressing the Knesset? Okay.
This man, head of state, yes, our representative to the world, the person whose job it is to be the public face of the most powerful nation in the history of the world, hitting us up with the old man Riz, quick to speak, quick to think. Oh man, sprightly Joe.
That mean that has been discussed, the possibility of going back to Israel and addressing the Knesset. Okay. Let's talk about the.
Okay. Is he trying to affect a tough guy attitude here? Well, yes, he's trying to speak carefully, which I don't necessarily blame him for. It's just because he's ancient, him trying to speak carefully also comes across as him being like a tortoise, like insanely slow. Yeah, he's buffering. Is this await us all? Getting old? No, some of us will die young.
It's interesting what you were saying there. Just little things I noticed you saying about things that look good or sound great, but don't necessarily provide the volume of aid needed. Seemingly the best way to do that is to go back to the way that things were before the war and to allow aid in by road. But just remind us why that isn't happening.
Definitely bringing in aid by road is the most efficient way of doing this. But at the moment, we only have 2 border crossings that are open, both in the south of Gaza, and they are quite limited in what is being let through. You need to have permission to bring goods across, and for some goods, that permission is being withheld from by the Israeli authorities. And of course, it's then also a question of getting it across. There's lots of checks on the goods, and then also the distribution within Gaza has been very difficult.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't know what's going to come of that. I don't really know what else to say. I feel like I've done 50 million segments on Israel and the Gaza Strip and this and that, and it's this like tiring inevitability of everything. I feel like one of the things that makes this particularly exhausting is the fact that we have modern social media nowadays. It used to be like something going on in another part of the world, we'd get updates on it from TV and the newspapers, and they would be very sanitized, and they would project a very one-sided perspective of what's going on. And even if you had sort of like a critical eye and you were looking for dissenting information, it was still something that you had to like work to engage with. Whereas now you go on Twitter and you're scrolling through and it's like, oh, here's a thirst trap, here's somebody shit posting, here's like a Palestinian kid with their arm blown off, and it's like, okay. And then you look at the news, and it's not just one ongoing story about the Gaza Strip. It's like 50,000 of them, and everything is happening so seemingly inevitably in spite of all senselessness being so like clearly obvious, you know? You can see the Israeli government and the IDF spokespeople and Biden lie pretty plainly and straightforwardly, and you just look and watch, and I mean, what can you even do or say about it, really? Sean made a great point on this in his Palestine video, where a White House spokesperson says we haven't seen evidence of IDF war crimes, while there are tons of tweets of IDF war crimes. Yeah, you get to like engage with it very directly, and yeah, I don't know. At least with what happened in the Ukraine war, like the Ukraine war is very straightforward and very simple morally, you know? Russia invaded. They shouldn't have done that. Likewise with Israel and the Gaza Strip. Israel started a genocide. They shouldn't do that. I don't think they should do that. But at least with the conflict in Ukraine, there is a, I don't know, reliably consistent, like you can go on and look at the media, you can go look at the news with regards to Ukraine, and for the most part, you're going to hear reasonable things like, Russia shouldn't have done an unprompted invasion of their neighbor. Ukraine shouldn't die. It is good to support people defending their country from a fascist neighbor. Like, it's straightforward. I can get behind this. You know, people get weird in the details, but for the most part, there's a strong consensus. With the Israel-Gaza thing, though, the script is reversed, and you just have to watch and deal with it. You know, you just like go on media, and it's people doing the exact opposite, justifying what Israel's doing. You know, actually, does Russia have a point? It's all Kremlin propaganda, just directed the other way. In a lot of cases, the IDF is worse than the Kremlin in terms of how they present their propaganda. I think they actually put less effort in. It's even more blatant. I'm not comparing one-to-one war crimes, Sherlock Smug. I'm just talking about the behavior of the government and the flagrancy of their dishonesty.